During World War II, Hitler seized control over Europe through the looting of artworks. The Nazi art theft was the greatest art theft in history. Over 650,000 works were taken from Europe by the Nazis. Most of the art was from Jewish descent, or it was considered degenerate in Hitler's eyes. Later on, some of the art was recovered by the Allies in the aftermath of the war, while others were never found. To this day, many works have not been returned to their rightful owners. The party that was responsible for the looting was called the Third Reich. The Third Reich took artwork worth billions of dollars and stored them in Germany. Some of the artworks that they had stolen eventually were banned and liquidated overseas to collect funds for the Nazi world effort. Artwork was found in over 100 repositories across Germany and Austria at the end of World War II. Later on in 1998, the U.S. Department of State tried to find these stolen works to return them to their rightful owners. They asked many museums across Europe to identify the provenance of their art collections to see if any had been collected. Eventually, a lost art database was also established to help document lost cultural property. In November 2013, authorities announced that they had found about 1,500 artworks confiscated by the Nazis during World War II. The 1,500 artworks that had been found 2 years earlier in a Munich apartment. The Munich apartment belonged to the son of Hildebrand Gerlit. These works included the artists Picasso, Matisse, and Chagall. They were also estimated to be worth about $1.35 billion. After examining the historical facts, we are left with the question of why did Hitler steal artworks across Europe? There's many reasons. It is possible that maybe he was trying to build a super museum. There is available factual evidence supporting this statement. Another reason could be that Hitler was an aspiring artist himself. He had a deep appreciation for art, and he knew how powerful art actually was. In Hitler's eyes and the rest of society, we have come to the conclusion and have learned throughout the years that art equals culture. That is the main reason why Hitler decided to steal art and architecture across Europe. What better way is there to seize control than to steal all of the culture that is across a continent? Another reason why Hitler may have decided to loot artworks across Europe could be that he had previously received rejection as an artist himself. As I said before, he was an aspiring artist when he was younger, and he applied to the Academy of Art Studies in Vienna and was denied entry 2 different times. Since Hitler seems to be a man of revenge, it would make sense that he would steal artwork to get back the power he was looking for in the art world. Examining the idea of the super museum, we can see why Hitler decided to loot so many artworks across Europe. His idea for the super museum was that the museum he would create would contain every important artwork in the world. This would show other Germans how great they were, as well as the rest of the world. Another aspect of the museum that he wanted to install would be a wing of degenerate art. This would be a kind of chamber of horrors to demonstrate how the Nazis saved their people from such horrors in the world. These degenerate art pieces would include anything that was not considered naturalism. For example, the degenerate wing would include abstract artworks, minimalist artworks, cubist, impressionist, and post-impressionist art. These were all types of art that Hitler did not support and did not see as ideal. He strongly believed that naturalism was the best type of artwork there was. So obviously there would be a strong emphasis on that in his super museum. One art piece that Hitler was extremely interested in getting his hands on was called the Gent altarpiece by Jan van Eyck. It was definitely Hitler's number one target because of not only its beauty, its fame and importance, but also because it had been taken from Germany to Belgium by the Treaty of Versailles, and getting it back would prove to his people how great Germany was, as well as get back at Belgium for originally taking the piece away from them. Interestingly enough, Hitler wasn't the first to actually come up with the idea of a super museum. A man called Jean-Dominique Vivant-Dinan was the first director of the Louvre Museum, and he had the same plan to loot lots of artworks across Europe to seize control. This man was actually Napoleon's chief art advisor, and he made a list of artworks that he wanted to seize to give Napoleon power. Napoleon was also the first general to have a dedicated art theft unit in his army, and he used it as a form of truce. So for example, if someone gave up an art piece, he would tell them that they would not get killed or they would not get shot. So he used it as a way to bribe them. Poland actually saw the threat coming from Germany and made some preparations in hiding some of their private collections. They were aware of the threat that Germany was throwing out there, and they had heard Hitler's speeches and kind of expected what was to come. In 1937, museums actually started to put a plan in place for the protection of art in the event of war with Germany. So in 1937, they really started to realize that the threat was real and it was time to hide these artworks so that they would not lose these cultural pieces that really influenced their society. And it was really important that across Europe they were starting to realize the threat and developing a plan to protect their artworks. Because on November 9th, 1938, many Jewish homes were actually set on fire and synagogues and businesses were destroyed. So it was the beginning of destruction soon enough. What was interesting about the looting is it was actually highly organized and systematic, and that's part of the reason why it was so successful. Their looting actually lasted for 7 years. So that's a really long time, and that's why so many artworks were actually stolen. Looting during the war also became an official policy for the Third Reich. To get certain artworks, they threatened and even killed anyone who resisted. So whether that was breaking into the homes of different Jewish people or whatever they had to do to seize the artwork they were looking for, They were killing anyone in their path and doing whatever they needed to do to get it. In June 1939, Hitler even appointed Dr. Hans Posey, who at the time was the director of the Museum of Dresden, it was called, and he appointed Hans because he was going to need him for the future Museum of Linz that he was planning, so his super museum. In 1942, the Germans seized the polyptych of the Mystical Lamb, which was by the brothers of Hubert and Jan van Eyck. They actually stored this and a few, an abundance of other artworks at the Berlin Flauch Towers. And this was kind of a secure area where they could hold on to all of these artworks. And that's where they were storing many of the collections at the time. So during this time, there was also people who were involved in trying to stop this from happening. There was the Monument Men that actually tried to seek down many of the paintings that were being stolen and many of the architectural pieces and trying to hide them from the Nazis at the time. So they put a lot of effort into that effort of holding on to those pieces and making sure that the Nazis did not get a hold of them. And in 1943, the U.S. actually created the Roberts Commission, and this was a commission that included MFAA officers, and they were charged to assist the forces in the recovery of works of art. Then, of course, on May 7th, 1945, Germany surrenders to the Allies. And unfortunately, at this time, the Friedrich Schonflach, the towers, actually caught on fire, and 500 or more paintings were destroyed, unfortunately, at this time, because that's where Germany was storing them. Later on, some paintings were actually identified as a part of the collection of the Louvre. So some snuck in there, and they realized that later on. And today, there's actually an international association of provenance researchers that was formed to help assist museums in evaluating their collections and looking out for stolen art in the collection. So to this day, we're still trying to find some of these lost artworks. The country's own art museums still have work to do to return many of the works back to the true owners and the victims of the Holocaust. So, another thing just to add, in 1996, the Austrian government had also actively taken steps to compensate victims of the Holocaust, and they actually did this by auctioning off paintings that were still within the government's hands, and donating the funds that they received to this to different Jewish organizations. So later on, there was more help put into helping support those who had suffered from the Holocaust. But to this day, we still need to do a lot of work to find these pieces. And so it's kind of a progress. Austria and 44 other countries at this point have signed something called the Washington Conference Principles, and it is in regards to Nazi confiscated art. And it's just so that basically this says that they are going to pursue just and fair solutions to court cases involving any ownership of the artworks if they are to turn up. So there was some disputes going on between museums having stolen pieces and the true owners not receiving those pieces back, and the museum trying to say that that piece was theirs because it was given to them, or they obtained it in some way. So still, as I mentioned earlier, museums need to keep looking at the artwork that they have and see if any of the art is potentially artwork that has been stolen. There's a lot of U.S. museums who have not done this to this day. The MoMA is one of them, actually, who is trying to say that they don't have any of the pieces, but they were in a court case at one point because one of the pieces was identified that they had owned. So for some reason, the U.S. has not really looked into their collections as properly as they need to in identifying if they were stolen during World War II or not. This is going to be going on for many years. To this day, we don't even know how many of these paintings were actually stolen, how many of these artworks, and so many architecture was destroyed, so culture really was lost from this happening. And that's something that we're not going to be able to get back. Europe's never going to be able to get that history back. Many cultures have suffered from this looting because a lot of the pieces have gotten destroyed and, they no longer have them. So, looking at everything that happened, Hitler was doing the looting to seize power over Europe. That's an obvious fact, and he was trying to keep control over their culture and prove to his people that Germany was better than the rest. And this is something we're still dealing with today. We're still dealing with the repercussions of what happened, and we, at this point, need to all put an effort in, and it's really important that museums continue trying to identify pieces, and it's also important that people come forward with stolen pieces of art if they have them in their own personal collections. But obviously, that's not easy for many to do, and there still might be some secret spots that we have not found yet that have a lot of these paintings still in them. So, but that sums up the looting of artworks across Europe and the Nazis seizing art during World War II as a way of controlling Europe. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation.